When Amy Winehouse began writing songs for Back to Black, she couldn't have imagined where the album would take her. Largely written to express the heartache she felt after her brief relationship with Blake Fielder Civil, the album would not only propel her to superstardom, for better or for worse, it would also pull him back into her life. Amy met Blake after the tour for her debut album Frank. She was increasingly spending her days drinking and playing pool at local pubs when she first laid eyes on him. From that moment on, she would find any excuse to drink at his favorite hangout so she could watch him from afar. According to her best friend Tyler James, from the beginning it was infatuation that bordered on obsession. She admired him, how he'd struggled, a hustler surviving any way he could. He was also charming, handsome, disheveled, did coke in the toilets, was a bit of a wrong'un and a hard nut who knew how to fight. Amy would sit and stare at him, salivating. I saw that look countless times. She was in awe of him. Blake represented a lot of the qualities she looked for, the sort of man who, if another man said something dodgy to his woman in the pub, would knock them out. That was Blake. They quickly became romantically involved, feeling an overwhelming intimacy they'd never experienced before.
We spent the summer together. She used to say we're like twins, and that was our relationship. I'd like to sabotage myself, and I think Amy liked to sabotage herself. Maybe that was our nature. Me and Amy were quite similar.
Amy's feelings towards Blake were so intense, she had his name tattooed over her heart within the first month of meeting him. She also began to romanticize his gangster side, embracing many of his more masculine traits, such as using Cockney rhyming slang and adopting his overall tough guy attitude. They soon saw themselves as a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde. Although she was in love with Blake, deep down she knew the relationship was doomed. She had always strongly rejected drugs like heroin and cocaine, and Blake was clearly a heavy drug user. He was also in a relationship with another woman, which further complicated matters. At the end of the summer, Blake went back to his girlfriend, telling Amy they were better off as friends. Broken-hearted, Amy lashed out by sleeping with one of his friends. He had hurt her, so she was going to hurt him back. Amy later had this to say of the relationship.
I fell in love with someone who I would have died for. We were in love, and we were together, and that's like a real drug, isn't it?
If the intimacy she experienced was like being high, the loneliness she felt afterwards represented an equally hard crash. The breakup sent Amy into a spiral of deep depression, which only exacerbated her drinking. She would drink all day, finding herself crying on the kitchen floor at night, writing the songs that would later become Back to Black. Her time with Blake would also shape the overall sound of the album. The jukeboxes in their favorite pubs featured classic 60s tunes instead of modern pop songs. Girl groups like the Shangri-Las were particularly influential. She would constantly play the song I Can Never Go Home Anymore whenever she was really depressed. Ronnie Spector of the Ronettes was also one of Amy's heroes, inspiring her signature eyeliner and beehive hairstyle. Rehab, which was the first single for Back to Black, made Amy an international sensation almost overnight. It was around this time Blake reappeared in her life, likely drawn by her newfound fame and success. Being the subject of a hit album probably didn't hurt either. In spite of the perceived opportunism, Amy's friend Tyler empathized with Blake's situation. I don't think he was just a money-grabbing whore, but he was a survivor, someone who'd had to hustle all of his life to get by. So it was handy that the girl he liked being with, who worshipped the ground he walked on, was now so rich they could look after each other and have everything they wanted and needed. The dark side, of course, is that Blake was an addict. So we'd also be thinking, and I'll never have to worry about getting money for heroin or crack again. They were soon inseparable, going almost everywhere together. Taking everyone by surprise, Amy and Blake got married in Miami. The only people invited to the wedding were two of Blake's friends. It was at this point Amy started using heroin and crack. While Blake introduced her to the drugs, it was her conscious decision to start taking them. And what she saw as a romantic gesture of self-sacrifice, Amy believed it would bring them closer together. She wanted to feel what he was feeling, regardless of how self-destructive it was. When Mitch Winehouse, her father, found out she was smoking crack, it was hard for him to believe. Amy had always strongly opposed what she referred to as Class A drugs, so he assumed she would eventually force Blake to get clean, not the other way around. Amy had always been a headstrong, independent spirit that couldn't be told what to do by anyone. It had been one of her most striking traits since she was a teenager. But with Blake, things were different. She subverted her own will and let him take charge. Following the wedding, Amy's management convinced her to move into an expensive hotel suite to protect her from the paparazzi. Amy and Blake were essentially cut off from the world, spending their days smoking drugs. It was during this period Blake started controlling her. According to Amy, his main method was texting whenever she was in another room so he could keep tabs on her. Amy also confided that Blake had been selling stories about her to the tabloids, shrugging it off as a way for him to feel independent and make his own money. Being constantly high while trapped in the hotel inevitably led to fighting. Late one evening, they were spotted by the paparazzi walking down the street from the hotel, bloodied with cuts and bruises on their arms, legs, and face. When Mitch questioned Amy afterwards, she claimed she had hit Blake and scratched him, but she wouldn't say whether he had hit her back. She later made a public statement saying she had cut herself, emphasizing Blake would never hurt her. "He did not and never has hurt me. He has such a hard time and he is so supportive. He is an amazing man who saved my life again and got cut badly for his troubles. All he gets is horrible stories printed about him and he just keeps quiet, but this is too much. I'll be alright. I need to fight my man's corner for him, though." The fighting took an ugly turn a month later on Amy's 24th birthday. Amy hated birthdays. She never wanted a party and preferred to pass the day with little to no acknowledgement. On this occasion, however, she readily accepted Tyler's invitation to go out and celebrate, presumably so she could get away from Blake for a few hours. Amy had been locked away with him doing drugs for almost 2 months straight and needed a break. She asked Tyler to wait outside while she got ready. When she finally emerged hours later, she had a bloodied split lip. It was obvious Blake had hit her. Although Tyler wanted to go inside and confront Blake, she convinced him not to interfere. She wouldn't be going out after all. Another event would underscore just how low Blake would drag her down. Earlier that year, Prince told the press he wanted to perform with Amy at one of his London shows. He was a big fan of hers, privately saying on several occasions she was a once-in-a-generation talent. He especially admired the song Love is a Losing Game and wanted to perform it with her at his last show. When Amy heard the news during an interview, she was ecstatic.
What?
Did you not know this?
No. I'm going to Minneapolis. See you later. Great. Yeah. I hope I can do it though. I don't know why I'm smiling. I really hope. I mean, I'll drop everything to do that.
Prince's visual director for the tour, Phil Griffin, formally extended the invitation. There was one condition: Blake couldn't come. To convince Blake to stay home, Amy stressed the performance was a work event, which she knew would discourage him from tagging along. She assumed he'd rather stay home and get high. Her friend Tyler came with her instead. Although they were both alcoholics, they promised each other they wouldn't drink out of respect for the occasion. Tyler vividly remembers meeting Prince. He was wearing a dressing gown, like a smoking jacket. It was some shade of purple. It really was. He looked like Prince relaxing in his dressing room, and he was incredibly nice, a gentle soul, and it was all so comfortable. I felt like he understood Amy. He just got her. Not many people ever did, not straight away. The performance went extremely well. Prince was so moved he had tears in his eyes by the end of the song. Amy and Tyler savored the moment afterwards, hardly believing her luck at performing with one of their favorite artists. For Amy, this was a dream come true. Back in the dressing room, spirits were high. Then Amy received the bad news. Blake's coming. When he arrived, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Blake was paranoid, itchy, going into Prince's toilet to do drugs. Everything switched to edgy. There was cash in the dressing room, just lying there, out in the open on the makeup table. No one was paying any attention to it. On the way home, Blake told Amy he had stolen a few £100 from Prince's dressing room, along with a few of his hairbrushes. She superficially joined him in laughter, but in reality felt ashamed about what had happened. The next day she called Prince to apologize, offering to return the money. He didn't care about the money, but the hairbrushes had sentimental value. He was particularly upset that his security thought Phil Griffin stole the cash, beating him up in the process. Apologies couldn't make up for that. Prince later asked Griffin several times if there was anything he could do to get Amy away from Blake and all the craziness surrounding her. He even offered to send a private jet to pick her up. In the end, there was nothing he could do to save Amy from her destructive marriage. As it turns out, prison would accomplish that instead. After the Prince debacle, Blake was arrested. In 2006, he and a friend had almost beaten a man to death. The guy had a broken cheekbone, nose, and eye socket. The following year, Blake tried to bribe the sole witness with £200,000. The police seized Amy's computers and demanded a full accounting of her finances. She was fortunately able to prove her innocence. Blake, however, was in serious trouble. Amy was loyal to a fault and would stand behind her man no matter what he had done. Whenever she spoke of Blake in public, she would refer to him as, quote, my Blake incarcerated, as if he were a man done wrong by the system. This was her conception of love. Right or wrong, you follow your man to the end, even if it means your own demise, a sentiment she perfectly captured in the song Some Unholy War. As if in response to everyone blaming Blake for her self-destructive behavior, Amy immediately took her drug use to the next level. Despite needing serious help, management kept pushing Amy to perform. For many shows, she was simply too wasted and distraught to sing, which led to booing and heckling from the crowd. They especially booed any time she mentioned Blake. Once he was released, Amy would constantly tell Mitch she wanted to get back together with Blake and help him get clean. While Blake was telling Amy he wanted to get back together with her, he was privately negotiating a divorce settlement with her dad. Mitch finally showed her a text from Blake demanding money. It was then that she realized Blake had been lying to her and that all he was interested in was her money. It was a hard blow, and I feared she might resort to drugs in an attempt to ease the pain. Eventually she spoke. I love him, Dad. I'll love him no matter what. In September 2009, Blake finally agreed to the divorce with no compensation. Amy's management was in the process of suing his mom for copyright infringement. She had sold stories to the press using Amy's letters to Blake. Blake offered to drop all claims against Amy if they in turn agreed to drop the lawsuit. Even after getting divorced, they would frequently see each other and discuss getting back together. Eventually, Amy was able to move on from Blake and stop using drugs, but she continued to care about him for the rest of her life. One of the last songs she wrote, You Always Hurt the Ones You Love, was about her relationship with him after Back to Black. Her friend Tyler was one of the only people to ever hear it. To me, it was the best song she'd ever written in her life. She thought so too. It was typical Amy. Clever lyrics, a ballad like Love is a Losing Game but 10 times better. She'd take a statement you've heard a million times, like You Always Hurt the Ones You Love, and nail it, expressing what that really felt like more than anybody ever had, with a genius melody. Tragically, Amy died from alcohol poisoning almost 2 years after her divorce. In a recent interview, Blake had this to say.
That there was genuinely love there, and I loved Amy, very, very much, and she loved me too. And if there was anything that could bring her back, I would, obviously.
Whatever one thinks of Blake, Back to Black would never have existed without him. Right or wrong, Amy loved him till the end. That has to be worth something. One thing is certain, though. For Amy, love truly was a losing game.